My name is Adrian Vale. 8 years ago, that name used to sit on magazine covers, bestseller lists, and some posters for book signings, where people lined up around the block just to hear me talk about loneliness like I had invented it. 2 years later, I had a major publisher movie option contracts and parties where everyone laughed too loud and drank too much. Then I started believing the praise. I spent money like someone who had never known shame, wrote like a machine, drank like a bottomless pit, and finally woke up inside a life even I didn't want to step into. At 34, I was left with a rundown apartment in Fremont, a few boxes of unsold books, a cracked laptop, and the reputation of a writer who had once shown promise and then killed it with his own hands. I rarely went home. More accurately, I stopped by the apartment only to change shirts, shower quickly, check how much cash was left in my wallet, and leave again. Some nights I passed out on a bar stool. Some nights I sat on a bench at the train station until morning. Some nights I walked through 3 neighborhoods just to avoid seeing the mailbox stuffed with unopened bills. That afternoon, the Seattle rain fell in that annoying, half-hearted way. Not heavy enough to call a storm, but persistent enough to keep every piece of clothing damp and cold. I had just been kicked out of a bar on Aurora Avenue because my card was declined for the 3rd time. I stood under the awning, head pounding, throat raw, watching cars slide past and wondering where the hell I was supposed to go next. Then I saw the sign. Juniper and ink. Used books. Coffee late night reads. I stepped inside for 2 reasons: the warm yellow light glowing behind the glass, and the knowledge that indie bookstores like this usually had a clean bathroom. The moment I walked in, I smelled old paper, fresh roasted coffee, and buttery pastries. The same scent that 8 years ago had been the smell of my life. Something tightened in my chest. The shop was small. Low wooden shelves, a few display tables of new releases, a reading corner with moss-green velvet chairs. A handful of people worked quietly on laptops. Soft jazz played low. Behind the counter at the far end, an orc girl was ringing up a customer while chatting. I meant to slip straight to the restroom. Then my eyes stopped on the poster beside the counter. 8th anniversary of The Hollow Shore, open discussion Friday night. Below it was the cover of my first novel. I stared at my own name printed on the poster like I was looking at a smiling corpse. "You okay?" I startled and turned. The orc girl was already standing in front of me. She was smaller than most female orcs I had ever seen, maybe just over 5'6", with narrow shoulders, olive green skin, the color of young leaves, and 2 tiny, cute tusks at the corners of her mouth that made her smile look both mischievous and sweet. She wore a brown apron, her black hair tied up high, colorful string bracelets on one wrist. Her golden brown eyes looked at me with quiet focus. I tugged my coat collar higher. "I'm fine. You look like you're about to pass out. I always look like this." She didn't laugh at me. She only tilted her head for a second, then handed me a glass of water. "Drink." I didn't order anything. "On the house," she said. "Or from me. Call it whatever you like." I should have walked out. But my throat was so dry that the sight of the cold water alone made something inside me soften. I took the glass and drank it in one go. She watched me the way someone fits a missing puzzle piece into place. "You're Adrian Vale." I froze. There are moments in life when hearing your own name feels like a slap. This was one of them. "No, I'm not." She pointed at the poster behind me. "You wrote the line. It wasn't the shore that lost the man. It was what he carried when he reached it." She paused. "You just looked at that poster the same way someone looks at a familiar grave." I cursed inside my head. "You've got the wrong guy." She leaned both hands on the counter, eyes bright in a strange, certain way. "Then answer me one thing. In chapter 12, why doesn't Eli walk into the blue house?" I should have stayed silent. But the old reflex was faster than my pride. Because it stopped being his home, I answered. He just hasn't admitted it yet. She gave a small smile, the kind you give when you find something you thought was lost forever. I knew it. Don't talk to me like you know me. I don't know you, she said. But I've been reading you for 8 years. I turned to leave. At that exact moment, my stomach growled loud enough for both of us to hear. My face burned. The orc girl looked at me, then at the clock on the counter. Sit down. I don't have money. I didn't ask. I don't need pity. I'm not offering pity. She lifted her chin. I'm buying a sandwich for my favorite writer. Totally different. 10 minutes later, I was sitting at the table by the window with a grilled sandwich and black coffee in front of me. She sat across from me, chin propped on her hand, watching me eat like it was the most normal thing in the world. My name is Meera, she said. Meera Bran, 26. I've worked here 4 years, and I've been your fan since I was 18. 8 years is a long time to like the wrong person. Maybe, she shrugged. But I still like that book. Just the one. She narrowed her eyes. You already know why. I let out a dry laugh. It was the first time in weeks the sound didn't make me sick of myself. Meera didn't ask the questions I hated most. She didn't ask why I disappeared. She didn't ask if I was writing anything new. She didn't ask if the rumors about bankruptcy, divorce, and drinking were true. She only talked about the book. She told me she reread The Hollow Shore once a year. She told me it had saved her during a terrible year at community college in Tacoma when she was a small orc girl who didn't look orc enough, not big enough, not tough enough, not what anyone expected. She said when she read about Eli pretending to be fine while falling apart inside, she finally felt like someone out there was telling the truth. I finished the sandwich. I drained the coffee. I knew I should leave. But the rain outside was coming down harder. My head was starting to throb again, and the thought of going back to my dark apartment filled with empty bottles made my chest feel tight. Meera watched me for a moment, then said very casually, "Do you have somewhere to sleep tonight?" I looked at her. That's a dangerous question. I'm an orc. I'm not stupid. That's not the point. It is the point. Because if I invite you home, it means I know what I'm doing. I leaned back in the chair. You always bring washed-up writers home. No, Meera bit her lower lip lightly. First time. You really shouldn't, maybe. She stood up and untied her apron. But you look like someone who just needs one dry place. So you don't end up as tomorrow's bad news. I'm not your problem. You're right. She slipped her phone into her pocket. But I'm still inviting you. I followed her home only because it was one night. That was what I told myself as I sat in the passenger seat of her old Subaru watching rain streak down the windows. Just one night. Meera's apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building near Green Lake. Small, neat, full of warm light. The living room had a burnt orange sofa plants on the windowsill and bookshelves covering almost an entire wall. The moment I stepped inside, I saw 3 things that made me want to run. First, the complete set of my books sat in the middle of the shelf. Second, every single one had colorful sticky notes sticking out like porcupine quills. Third, a small framed photo showed a younger Meera holding The Hollow Shore at a signing. In the corner of the picture was my own blurry arm signing the book. I stood frozen in front of the shelf. Meera set her keys on the table. I know it's a little weird. A little weird? Okay, very weird. She walked over and took the frame down. Want me to put it away? I looked at the blurred corner of my own arm in the photo. No need. Meera pointed at the sofa. You sleep here. I have a new blanket. Bathroom's on the left. There's food in the fridge. And... She hesitated for a beat. There's no alcohol in the house. I looked up. I'm just saying it up front, she said, so it doesn't get awkward later. I should have felt insulted. Instead, I only felt tired. Is there hot water? Yes. Then tonight is already better than I deserve. Meera smiled. That night, after I showered, I lay on the sofa in the apartment of a small orc girl who was everything the world had never asked an orc to be: quiet, kind, stubborn in the softest way, surrounded by plants and books, listening to her moving around in the kitchen. I had told myself I was only staying one night. I didn't know that night was the first time in years I didn't try to disappear from my own life. The next morning, I woke to the smell of toasted bread and cinnamon. I opened my eyes and spent a few seconds remembering where I was. White ceiling cream curtains, the soft hum of a kettle in the kitchen, not a bar stool, not a train station bench, not my own apartment. Meera's place. I sat up, back aching. On the coffee table was a mug of coffee and a yellow sticky note written in round, neat handwriting. Went to the morning shift. Fridge has eggs, cheese, fruit. If you leave before I'm back, just lock the door. If you're still here tonight, text me. Meera. I picked up the note and stared at it like it was some kind of joke. Tonight. Not if you want, not if you need. Just an open door left casually on the table. I could have left. I should have left. But my head still throbbed. My stomach was empty. My phone was down to 9%. And the thought of going back to my dark apartment with its pile of empty bottles made me feel emptier than my wallet. I opened the fridge. Eggs, oat milk pesto, a box of strawberries, several meal prep containers all labeled with tiny cheerful stickers. I ate 2 slices of toast, 3 eggs, half the strawberries, and drank another cup of coffee. Then I sat back down on the sofa. When Meera came home that afternoon, she opened the door and saw me still there. She paused for exactly 1 beat. You didn't leave. You wrote tonight. The corner of her mouth twitched. You're really going to argue sentence structure with the person who fed you breakfast? Fed feels like a strong word. Tolerated, I smirked. Sounds more accurate. Meera kicked off her shoes, walked into the kitchen, and set a paper bag on the counter. I bought ramen. For you, that might be dinner? For me, it's a morally questionable decision because I've eaten ramen 2 days in a row. I leaned back on my elbows and watched her move around. You're not scared I'll steal something and disappear. You already did. She glanced at the sink. You washed the dishes. I'm impressed. I didn't answer. Meera filled the kettle, then turned to look at me. How long? How long what? How long do you plan on staying? The question was light but not naive. I knew she wasn't stupid. She was just kinder than I deserved. A few days. A few days is the worst number in existence. 3 real days. I'm a writer. I can make it sound real. Meera put a hand on her hip and studied me for a few seconds, then laughed. Fine. 3 days. But I have conditions. I hate conditions. So do I. That's why I only have 3. She held up her fingers. 1, no strangers in my apartment. 2, no smoking inside. 3, no passing out drunk on my kitchen floor. I've never passed out drunk on your kitchen floor. Exactly. Meera turned back to the stove. So keep that record clean. The first 3 days passed so easily it felt dangerous. I slept on the sofa. Meera went to work at the bookstore, came home in the late afternoon, cooked or dragged me to the taco truck down the street, then sat at the dining table in the evening rereading The Hollow Shore with highlighters and sticky notes like it was some kind of ritual. I watched and felt sick. On the 4th night, she placed the book in front of me and pointed at a passage. I don't understand. I'm thrilled for you. No. She was serious. I really don't. Why does Eli burn his mother's letter but keep the key? I glanced at the paragraph. It was a good question. Too good for someone who was just a fan sticking posters on walls. Because he wants to end the story, I said, but he's not ready to end the possibility of going back. Meera blinked. So even while destroying himself, he still leaves himself one way out. Everyone who destroys themselves does that. I leaned back in the chair. Otherwise, they'd have been dead a long time ago. She looked at me a little longer, then wrote something on a sticky note. I just gave you a free discussion point, I said. Not free. What? She tapped the book cover. You're on night 4 now. I looked up. Meera gave me a very straight smile. I'll give you 3 more days. In exchange, every night you answer one question about the books. I stared at her. Then at the clean, warm apartment, at the food, at the sofa that was already starting to remember the shape of my body, at my own reflection in the window glass. Scruffy beard, dark circles, wearing her oversized hoodie because she had tossed it to me the day before. I knew I should feel ashamed. Instead, I only thought a deal like this was probably more honest than most contracts I'd signed in my life. Okay, I said. 1 question per night. Meera held out her hand. Deal. I looked at her small hand, the slightly rough fingertips, a smudge of blue ink on her thumb. I shook it. That deal lasted 2 more weeks. I started using Meera's admiration like currency. Not in the worst way, but not noble either. I let her buy better coffee because my brain only works with decent coffee. I let her drive me to my old apartment because I need to pick up my manuscripts. I let her order late-night food because talking about water symbolism makes me hungry. Worst of all, I knew exactly what I was doing. My own apartment in Fremont smelled of mold and old liquor. When Meera stepped inside, she paused for 1 beat, but she didn't look horrified. Clothes on the floor, empty cans. Unopened mail? The kitchen counter had 2 dirty glasses and a pan crusted black. In the corner sat a stack of my own books, some still in plastic. Meera walked through the mess like it was a small war zone. You actually live here? Legally, yes. And as a human being, not often. She didn't say anything else. She just helped me grab the laptop, 2 notebooks, and the few clean shirts I still owned. Then she stopped in front of the low shelf by the desk. There was a thick bundle of letters tied with a rubber band covered in dust. What's this fan mail? Or bills? Maybe both. You never open them. I went through a phase where I opened everything. I shoved the laptop into the bag. It didn't help. Meera picked one up and looked at the messy handwriting on the outside. Sometimes people write letters not to change anything. Then why? She looked at me. So someone knows they weren't pointless. I turned away. I hated when she was right. That night, I bought a mini bottle of bourbon on the way back and hid it in my coat pocket. I waited until Meera was in the shower, then sat on the fire escape balcony and drank half of it. The Seattle wind was freezing. The liquor burned like acid, but at least it felt familiar. I stumbled into the kitchen at midnight and knocked over a glass. The light clicked on. Meera stood in the bedroom doorway, hair messy, wearing an oversized t-shirt, eyes sleepy but voice completely awake. You drank. I have the right to drink. Not in my house. This is the balcony. You just knocked over a glass in my kitchen. I laughed dry and cracked. Real loyal fan. Watching your idol fall apart in real time. Meera didn't blink. I don't need you to be perfect. She stepped forward and picked up the glass. But don't lie in my kitchen. That sentence cut deeper than any scolding ever could. I watched her kneel and wipe the water off the floor, and for the first time in months, I felt like absolute garbage. The next morning, I woke up earlier than Meera. I made coffee. I washed every dish. I dropped the mini bourbon bottle into the trash chute in the hallway. When Meera came out, I slid a fresh mug toward her. I'm sorry. She took the mug and sat across from me. Are you sorry for spilling the water? Or for using me as a free stop with a fridge? I went still. Meera took a sip of coffee. I'm not stupid, Adrian. I stayed quiet. It was the first time she had said my name without you or the writer attached, like she had finally looked past everything and seen the actual person. Then why are you still letting me stay? I asked. Meera set the mug down. Because I don't think you've hit the bottom you think you have, she answered. And because I didn't invite you here to worship you. I invited you because when I was 18, one of your books made me feel less like a freak. That's all. I didn't know what to say. Meera stood up and grabbed her bag. I'm working late tonight, if you're still here. She paused. I want to ask you why Eli never once says the name of his wound out loud. The door closed. I sat alone in her small apartment staring at the coffee still steaming. For the first time in months, I opened my laptop for a reason other than checking my bank balance. That evening, Meera came home close to 9. I was still sitting at the same spot at the dining table, laptop open in front of me. The screen was almost completely white. I had typed one sentence, stared at it, deleted it, typed another, and deleted that too. The fact that I was even sitting here, instead of out on the street or in a bar, already felt like progress. Meera set her bag down and unwrapped her scarf. You're still here. I'm making full use of those 3 extra days you gave me. She glanced at the laptop screen. You writing? No. I closed the lid. I'm torturing myself. Meera went to make tea, then sat across from me with the well-worn copy of The Hollow Shore. She opened it to chapter 17, the scene where Eli stands outside the hospital doors but never walks in. Her finger stopped on a line she had underlined so many times the ink had started to fade. Why does Eli always say he's fine even when he knows he's breaking? I leaned back in the chair. Because once you say it out loud, it becomes real. That sounds too simple. It felt simple when I wrote it. Meera waited in silence. I let out a long breath. Fine. My father was in the hospital back then, heart failure. I spent weeks walking between the ICU and the cafeteria downstairs. Every time a nurse asked if I was okay, I said yes. I thought if I kept saying it, the world would eventually believe me. That chapter was written after one of those nights. Meera didn't reach for her sticky notes right away. She just looked at me for a long time. None of your interviews ever mentioned that. Because interviews are where people wrap your pain in pretty sentences. I gave a tired smile. I got tired of it. Meera nodded slowly. I always thought that chapter was about hospitals. It wasn't. I know. I looked up. She bit her lip lightly, then spoke slow and clear. I think it's about someone who's terrified that if he admits he's broken, everyone will finally see he was never as strong as they believed. There are moments when someone doesn't say something huge. They say the exact right thing, and you don't know whether to run or fall to your knees. I stared at her. Meera shrugged. Am I wrong? No. My voice came out quiet. It's just, not many people read that far. I did. She smiled. 8 years now. From that night on, our deal changed. It stopped being a washed-up writer paying rent on a sofa with lazy answers. Every evening after Meera got home from work, we ate dinner and sat at the table by the window. She asked, I answered. Some nights we argued. Some nights we sat in long silences between sentences. Meera asked why I hated my 3rd book even though it sold the best. Because it was smart in an empty way, I told her. I wrote it so people would quote it, not so anyone would see themselves in it. Did you know it was empty while you were writing? Yes. Then why keep going? I liked the money. Liked being flown to New York. Liked hotel rooms. Liked the way people stood up when I walked into a room. Meera didn't let it go. So why didn't you come back to writing something real after that? I looked at the glass of water in front of me. Because once you learn how well you can pretend to be good, it's hard to believe you still have anything real left. Meera leaned back, thinking. You know what the craziest part is? I'm guessing I'm about to be insulted. The worst sections you ever wrote are still better than most of the stuff people call touching literature online, she said it plainly. But I can tell when you're speaking the truth and when you're performing. They feel different. I frowned. You're saying the last 2 books were performances? Yeah. Brutal. You hiring me? No. Then I don't owe you lies. I laughed out loud. Meera laughed with me. The small kitchen filled with a sound so strange I had to stop for a second just to realize it was what people meant by breathing easy. During the day while Meera was at work, I started doing small things around her apartment. I folded the blanket, took out the trash, fixed the loose leg on the table, changed the bulb in the hallway, not to pay her back. My hands just couldn't stand sitting still anymore. One afternoon, Meera texted me. The boss asked if you can fix the collapsed shelf in the self-help section. Payment in books and sandwiches. I replied, self-help is the most useless genre humanity ever invented. She texted back 3 seconds later. Then come help it collapse with dignity. I showed up at Juniper and Ink at 4. The owner, Dell, a middle-aged wolf with salt and pepper beard and round glasses, looked at me. Once recognized me and said nothing. He just pushed the toolbox toward me. That shelf should have died last winter. I feel you, I said. Dell snorted. I spent nearly an hour fixing it. Meera moved between the coffee counter and the stockroom, slipping me a cookie or a glass of water whenever she had a free second, or simply standing there watching me work like tightening screws was worth watching. When I finished, Dell handed me a sandwich and a stack of books wrapped in paper. I'm paying you a little extra, he said. You're not worried I'll sell them for booze? Dell jerked his chin toward Meera, who was busy shelving books. She'll know if you do. I carried the stack home. Inside were novels by Baldwin Le Guin Ishiguro, a few short story collections, and a plain black notebook, no self-help at all. That night, Meera saw the notebook. Dell gave you that? Yeah, he likes you. He just pities me. No. Meera shook her head. When a grumpy old man gives someone an empty notebook, it means he's hoping they'll put something in it. I didn't answer. A week later, an email from Celeste Rowan, my old editor, landed in my inbox. Adrian Northline wants a special 8th anniversary edition of The Hollow Shore. They're asking if you'll write a new foreword. 1,500 words. The money isn't huge, but it's enough to clear a few bills. If you're interested, call me. I read it twice, then closed the email. Meera sat across the table, sticking another note into Chapter 20. What was that, old editor? Good news. Depends on your definition of good. I have a very wide definition. Read it to me. I don't read work emails to fans. Then read it to the person currently lending you her sofa. I glared at her, but read it anyway. When I finished, Meera asked only one question. Are you going to write it? No. Why not? I don't want to turn that book into a dressed-up corpse for people to admire. Meera closed the book. Or are you scared you don't have anything left to say to it? I stayed quiet. She didn't push. She just stood up and started washing the dishes. But when she came back, Meera stopped behind my chair and rested her hand on the back of it. Here's the thing, she said softly. If you really have nothing left to say to that book, why do you talk for an hour? Every time I ask you a question, I sat perfectly still. Meera leaned in until she could look straight into my eyes. Maybe you're not out of words. Maybe you're just out of safe places to tell the truth. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I wrote a paragraph I didn't hate the second I finished it. It was only 5 sentences. It wasn't the foreword for the reprint. It was 5 sentences about a man sitting in a kitchen that wasn't his, listening to a kettle sing, realizing some doors open not because he deserved it, but because someone was kind enough not to lock them. I read those 5 sentences over and over until 2 in the morning. They weren't perfect, but they were alive. After those 5 sentences, I didn't explode into some movie montage burst of genius. There was no sudden flood of perfect pages. What came back first wasn't tigging it. It was rhythm. Meera built the rhythm for me the same way she did everything else, quietly, without asking permission, simply sliding it into my days like an extra mug on the dish rack. Morning's coffee, eggs, phone turned off for 1 full hour. Afternoons, at least 20 minutes outside, walking around Green Lake or helping Dell at the shop. Evenings, no drinking, real food. One honest paragraph, no matter how bad. And every night before bed, she asked the same question. Was today's part real? I hated that question. I also needed it. I started sleeping better. Not great, but enough that I didn't wake up hating the daylight. I went with Meera to Juniper and Ink more often. Some days I fixed outlets. Some days I carried boxes of new arrivals. Some days I just sat in the back corner with my laptop, wrote one paragraph, deleted two, and called it enough. Meera never asked how many words I got. She only asked if the words were true. One rainy afternoon, the power went out for 10 minutes. Customers stayed put in the dim light, some using their phones as flashlights, a few laughing about it. Dell stood behind the counter, cursing the electric company. Meera turned to me. Read it. Read what? The new part. You're insane. There are only 8 people here, 8 strangers. You used to speak in front of 400. I also used to embarrass myself in tabloids. You want an encore? Meera folded her arms. Adrian, listen. I'm not asking you to launch a book. I'm asking you to read 3 paragraphs to a handful of people stuck in the dark because of Seattle rain. If it sucks, the lights will come back and everyone will forget. Dell tossed me a flashlight. I hate agreeing with her, he grumbled, but she's right. I glared at both of them. Then I stood up. I don't remember walking to the small reading platform. I only remember my hands shaking a little when I opened the notebook. Since Seattle is trying to drown us and none of you can scroll your phones right now, I'm going to read something unpublished. If it's terrible, blame the rain. A few soft chuckles. I read. It was the short piece about a man who had lost almost everything but still got asked very kindly if he wanted more coffee. About a small orc girl who kept leaving the door open even when he didn't deserve it. I didn't look at Meera while I read. When I finished, the shop stayed quiet for one long beat. The kind of silence a writer understands people had taken the words inside. Then the clapping started. Not loud, not wild, just warm and honest. Enough to make my throat tight. I looked up. Meera stood by the literature shelf, eyes shining, in that way that made me hate how much I liked it. On the way home, we stopped at the food truck for burgers. Meera took a huge bite, chewed, and only then said, "See, you still work." I'm not a coffee machine. No, coffee machines are more reliable than you were a few months ago. I laughed, then stopped short. You know I've been using you, right? Meera lowered her burger. I know. From the beginning. Around night 2, she wiped sauce off her finger. Night 1, you were too exhausted to calculate anything. I looked at her, shame rising slow and heavy. Then why did you still let me stay? Meera tilted her head, thinking like she was weighing her answer. Because I'm a fan, yeah. But not the kind who thinks the person they like isn't allowed to be broken. She said it simply. I've read you for 8 years. I know you write best when you let the characters be ugly, wrong, weak. I figured the guy who wrote that deserved a place to sit down before life threw him out. I had nothing to say. Meera looked straight at me. Besides, she added, you're not the only one who's ever used someone as shelter. I've done it too. The difference is I got lucky and met people who didn't lock the door. The wind off the bay blew cold and clean. I looked down. I owe you. You owe me for sandwiches and gas. She shrugged. The rest, just write something real. That'll be payment enough. A week later, I went back to my own apartment for the first time without Meera dragging me. I opened the door. The smell of damp and old liquor hit me like a bad memory. I stood in the middle of the mess for a long time, then started cleaning. 6 trash bags, every empty bottle gone. Windows thrown open, counters scrubbed, clothes folded. By evening, I sat on the floor exhausted, but for the first time, the place didn't feel like a cave. It felt like a room someone had simply left empty. Meera showed up after her shift with pizza. She stepped inside and stopped. Oh. Is your professional critic response no? She walked a slow circle around the living room. I'm trying really hard not to look too emotional because you finally looked at your own place like somewhere a person could live. I smiled faintly. You say that like I just learned how to tie my own shoes. Pretty close. We ate pizza on the floor because the chairs still needed wiping. Rain tapped the windows. The apartment was still ugly, but it wasn't abandoned anymore. Meera leaned her chin on her hand and looked at my now cleared desk. You moving back here? I think so. Really? Yeah. She smiled, but something flickered in her eyes had gone too fast for me to name. Yet I still didn't like it. But not yet, I said. Meera looked up. I'm not ready to be here completely alone again. She was quiet a moment, then nodded. Okay. Later, when I walked her back to her building, I lingered longer than usual in the hallway. Show me your copy of the book, I said. Which one, The Hollow Shore? The one that looks like a stationary accident. Meera laughed out loud. She brought it out. The cover was faded, the spine cracked, sticky notes everywhere. Inside the front cover was my own messy signature from 8 years ago. For Meera, may you always find the shore. I stared at the line. When I wrote that, I thought I was pretty clever. When I read it, I cried, Meera said. I flipped through the pages, so many lines underlined. So many notes in the margins. Eli is lying here. This is the fear of being left behind. He wants to come back but doesn't know how to ask for forgiveness. At the very last chapter, I found a line she had written in blue ink. I don't think Eli needs saving from the city. I think he needs someone who will sit in the kitchen and make him tell the truth. I looked up. Meera looked a little embarrassed. I wrote that when I was 22. Kind of cheesy. No. My voice came out soft. You read it right. The kitchen went quiet. I handed the book back. Stepped closer. There's something I want to fix. What? For 8 years you've been a fan. Yeah. I don't want you to be just a fan anymore. Meera studied me. I want you to be the first reader of the next one. Her eyes widened, not the excited kind, but the kind when someone is handed something they're afraid to dream too big about. You sure? No, I was honest. But I think the things worth doing usually start from exactly that kind of not sure. Meera set the book down gently. Okay, she said. I'll read it. I leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't like the loud, confident kisses I used to give when I was famous. This one was slow, short, a little shaky, and so real that when I pulled back, I had to steady myself on the edge of the counter. Meera touched my wrist lightly. You're shaking. I know. So am I. We both laughed. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was borrowing someone else's life. I felt like I was finally stepping into one I might still have the right to keep. 2 months later, I sent Celeste not a 1,500-word foreword for the reprint. I sent her the first 8 chapters of the new novel, temporary title Kitchen Light. She called me the same night, voice sharp, with the kind of excitement editors only let out when they mean it. Adrian, yeah. You finally decided to live again. I hate the way you open every call. And I hate waiting 3 years for you to write something that actually sounds like you. She paused, and I heard her smile through the phone. It's really good. I sat in my apartment now with new curtains, a clean kitchen counter, and a warm lamp in the reading corner watching thin rain slide down the window glass. You don't have to say that to keep me hooked. Boy, I've edited enough self-destructing writers to know the difference between real and fake. Celeste exhaled. Look, I'm not asking for promises. Just don't disappear halfway. I glanced across the room. Meera was sitting on the floor sorting a box of paid bills' legs, tucked under her one earbud, dangling tiny tusks, showing as she concentrated. She looked up and gave me a small questioning smile. I don't think I'm disappearing this time, I told Celeste. She was quiet for a second on the other end. When can you send more? Depends, I said. If someone keeps making me go to bed at a decent hour, probably soon. Celeste laughed dryly and hung up. I set the phone down. Meera tilted her head. What did she say? Worst case scenario, keep going. Sounds terrifying. It is. Meera stood, walked over, and stopped in front of me. 3 months since the night I first walked into Juniper and Ink just to use the bathroom. 3 months since I told myself I was only staying one night. 3 months since I was a drunk who smelled like rain and lived like the best part of his life was already over. I hadn't magically become a new person. I still woke up some mornings with a heavy head and the old shame sitting in my chest. I still walked past bars and felt my hands itch. I still had days when the words came out so badly, I wanted to throw the laptop out the window. The difference was, I didn't do any of those things alone anymore. Meera gave me her work schedule so I wouldn't sit up until 3 a.m. pretending I was fine. I gave her a key to my place. She left her toothbrush in my bathroom. I cleared a drawer for her. She took 2. I pretended to complain. On weekends, we split time between her apartment near Green Lake and mine in Fremont. I fixed the bookshelves. She hung pictures. I sold an old collection of fountain pens to pay off a credit card. She found me a small, quiet support group. I went. Not because I suddenly felt strong, but because for the first time I had a reason bigger than shame to stay sober. One Saturday night, Juniper and Ink held the rescheduled 8th anniversary discussion for the Hollow Shore, the one Rain had cut short months earlier. Meera wore a deep wine sweater, hair tied low, a little leaf-shaped clip catching the light. She moved between the chairs, adjusting mics, stacking cookies, chatting with customers in that bright energy that always made the whole room feel warmer. Dell stood by the counter and looked at me. You going up? I hate talking, but you'll do it? Why? He took a sip of coffee. Because that girl spent a week planning this without telling you. And because a few people in here need to hear how a book can come back and save the person who wrote it. I turned and watched Meera. She was crouched talking to a college goblin kid, laughing so hard her eyes curved. I walked over. You hid this from me. Meera looked up. I just didn't want you to panic early. You're terrible at the definition of no pressure. I tried. She lowered her voice. If you don't want to speak, you don't have to, really. I looked around the shop. 20-something people, all kinds. A middle-aged wolf couple. 2 young orcs. An elderly fey woman, a teenager, who looked like his mom had dragged him along. And in the front row sat a tiny, 19-year-old orc girl, clutching the Hollow Shore exactly the way Meera once had in that old photo. I turned back to Meera. You know what the most annoying thing about you is? I have a list. Be specific. You make me want to be worthy of what you saw in me. Meera's breath caught for half a second. Then very softly she touched my hand. Then go. I went up. I didn't talk about sales numbers. I didn't talk about awards. I didn't tell the old funny writer anecdotes I used to use to make crowds laugh. I told the truth. I told them I wrote that book at 26 thinking I was saving the world when really I was just trying to name my own fear. I told them I spent a long time believing that if I couldn't make anything good anymore, I had no value left. I told them I was wrong, that sometimes a book outlives its writer because there are readers who meet it with the bravest part of themselves. Then I read a passage from Kitchen Light, the one about a man who had lost nearly everything but was still asked very kindly if he wanted more coffee. When I finished, no one clapped right away. They stayed quiet first. The kind of quiet every writer understands the words had landed inside them. Then the applause came slow, full, real. Meera stood at the back of the rows, eyes wet, but smiling. Afterward, the young orc girl from the front row came up, hands shaking a little as she held out her copy of The Hollow Shore. This book got me through my first year of college, she said. I just wanted you to know. I looked at her for a long moment. Thank you for saying that. I signed my name. Not the practiced camera-ready signature, just my name, simple and real. When the last customer left, Dell flipped the closed sign. Meera was gathering paper cups when I called her. Meera. She turned. I pulled an envelope from my coat pocket. What's this? The money you spent on me, Adrian. Take it. She took the envelope and looked inside, then let out a soft breath. You didn't have to, I did. I stepped closer. Not because you kept count, but because I want whatever happens between us from now on to stop being a debt. Meera folded the envelope slowly. Then what is it now? I looked at her, this small, bright, stubborn orc girl who had never tried to fix me with lectures, only with warm sandwiches,